Welcome to A2Council Update, a recap of the Ann Arbor City Council meeting on August 19, 2024. This meeting included comments and discussion about hiring a private broker to sell city-owned property, rezoning and approval of a site plan at Nixon Road, adding land use buffers to the Uniform Development Code, reducing the number of votes required for approval at the city's Planning Commission, supporting state legislation to increase access to state IDs and driver's licenses, funding special events through local organizations, and amending regulation of home businesses. This is the voting chart for the council meeting on August 19, 2024. One agenda item was postponed. All others were approved. All votes were unanimous. Councilmember Cornell was absent. This is the third council meeting she has missed this month. Cornell was absent from the last regular meeting on August 8th and also failed to attend the council work session on August 12th. You can find this voting chart and more information about this meeting at A2Council.com. Like and subscribe if you would like to see more content like this. The meeting included an update from Jeff Pfeiffer of the Ann Arbor Area Transportation Authority.
First, as many of you know, we had some exciting news happen to the ride in relation to zero emissions buses. In April, we submitted an application to the FTA for a low-no grant application, and happy to announce in early July, we heard from the FTA that we were being awarded $25 million as part of our grant application. Very exciting for the ride. Secondly, want to announce that the ride is proud to continue delivering on our promises made to our voters in our 2022 millage proposal. Starting next Monday, August 26th, we will be expanding our service, basically offering more service more often, and we're also increasing frequency and our hours on weekend services as well. And also we'll be expanding frequency and capacity for our late night and holiday services such as FlexRide. We've seen really great ridership on our Washtenaw Express route. You'll remember that was our route that launched earlier this spring. Basically a fixed route service with limited stops connecting the Blake Transit Center in Ann Arbor to the Ypsilanti Transit Center.
After introductory remarks, public comments, and staff explanations, Council discussed agenda items for about 20 minutes. 7 people signed up in advance to offer public comments. 3 people spoke to topics on the agenda. The consent agenda this week included 15 items and expenditures of over $14 million. One item, the establishment of a State Street Social District, was removed from the agenda prior to the meeting. One item on the consent agenda was pulled for discussion. CA2 directs the city administrator to contract with a private broker or agent to sell the city-owned property at 415 West Washington. In recent years, this property has been discussed as a potential site for housing, despite a staff warning that its location on a floodplain makes it inappropriate for such development. 2 months ago, City Council considered the sale of 415 West Washington and approved 18 months of exclusive negotiations with developer 4M LLC. This week, a staff memo explains that those negotiations are no longer happening. City staff now recommend use of a private broker. The private broker would receive and assess all offers related to 415 West Washington, in contrast to a more open process where the city would publicly receive and consider proposals. Earlier in the evening, a commenter spoke to the issue.
CA2, 415 West Washington. As a broker, I'm very familiar with what happens when brokers aren't told all the information and then it gets late in a transaction. We know that it doesn't meet federal and local policies, and you've been written that in detail and at length from your floodplain manager, recently retired one at the city, that it didn't meet the letter and intent of the UDC in terms of PUDs and premium heights, et cetera. That'd be very important for any prospective buyer to know that, thus the broker to know that.
In answer to questions, staff explained the difference between a private broker and a city-issued RFP, or request for proposals.
For us, I mean, it's both processes solicit competitive offers for the property. An RFP process is a point-in-time type process where you get a fixed set of offers and then compare those, select a winning or preferred bidder, and then begin negotiations with that preferred bidder specifically. That narrows those options to that one development group specifically. Use of a seller's agent or a broker allows those negotiations to go on continuously until and often allow negotiations with more than one development group at a time, soliciting or negotiating for the best offer possible for the site.
Those negotiations would be conducted by the private broker rather than the city. This item and all others on the consent agenda were approved unanimously. Council considered a rezoning of nearly 28 acres at Nixon Road from R4A to R4D. This rezoning will permit the expansion of the apartment community called Owl Creek. Earlier in the evening, people spoke at a public hearing.
I live in the Owl Creek apartments where the proposed rezoning is happening. I was just curious, looking at the documents, they've proposed about a 7-meter variance on the rear setback limits. Are there any impacts that would happen to the Oakwoods nature area there? I know there's wetland there.
This is a rezoning from R4A to R4D, not just for the proposed new construction, but for the entire 28-acre site, which includes 3 existing 3-story apartment buildings with a clubhouse. One could make a reasonable case against this rezoning. The wetland there is one of the largest and most important in the city, and it connects underground to other wetlands further south. So higher density right at the edge of this wetland, variance or no variance, could harm water quality and species diversity. On the other hand, there is a wetland monitoring plan, and it's in the development agreement, and the rezoning enables a new 5-story, 131-unit apartment building, which will use parking that already exists but isn't currently used. So personally, taking everything into account, I support this rezoning.
Council briefly discussed it.
This rezoning will allow the construction, will allow us to consider the construction of the Owl Creek Phase 2 site plan. I want you to note that the current maximum height of the buildings on site is 38.7 feet, and the proposed height of the new building is about 60 feet, which is to say roughly 5 stories tall, or 5 stories tall, not roughly. The condition caps the height of the building at 75 feet in deference to concerns by the neighbors, because the R4D zoning allows height up to 120 feet.
The rezoning was approved unanimously. Council then considered the site plan and development agreement associated with the rezoning at Owl Creek. Earlier in the evening, a public commenter spoke in support.
This is a good project. Electric building with a good heating system.
Council discussed the site plan.
There are currently 3 3-story apartment buildings on this property, and adding this building will bring the site total to 395 units. These will be in proximity to services and jobs, so it's a terrific increase in housing there. The electrification is in the development agreement. It is not attached to the zoning. That means that it is for this site plan only. So if this plan does not go through, the electrification will not be a requirement attached to this parcel in any way. There is no plans to do any construction on the area of the site that directly abuts the nature area.
It's infill development that provides much needed rental units in Ward 2 on a site that was already prepared for housing. In addition to the all-electric units, there's EV parking spaces, 10 installed and 86 capable, and all around this project helps meet our city's sustainability goals.
The site plan was approved unanimously. Council then considered amendments to the bylaws of the City Planning Commission. Procedural amendments will lower the threshold for approval at the Planning Commission, reducing it from 6 votes to 5 votes. In a memo, City staff explained that conflicts of interest from members of the Planning Commission have prompted occasional recusals. Earlier in the evening, a public commenter spoke to the issue.
Right now, there's an issue with too many recusals, so perhaps you can select commissioners who have less likelihood of conflicts of interest and less likely to have to recuse themselves.
The current chair of the Planning Commission was appointed in November 2020. According to LinkedIn, Wanwoo Lee is the Chief Real Estate Officer for Oxford Companies. Since his appointment, Mr. Lee has been recused from 20 votes at the Planning Commission when policy decisions had a direct impact on properties owned by his employer, Oxford Companies. Council expressed support for the amendments.
CPC recommends modification to this section to reduce the standard from 6 to 5 affirmative votes, and I support this change, and I hope that you will too when it comes back to us for second reading, and I hope that you will send it along to second reading too.
The notion that you want to find people who have nothing to do with local land use questions. I don't truck with that. I think this is a good thing and shows a planning commission filled with professionals of engagement, experience, and wisdom.
The amendments were approved unanimously at first reading. At a future meeting, they will be the subject of a public hearing and final approval at second reading. After a brief introduction, Council unanimously approved amendments to the City Code requiring a 15-foot buffer between areas of vehicular use and residential districts or public parks. At a future meeting, these amendments will be the subject of a public hearing and final approval at second reading. Council considered a resolution expressing support for state legislation that will expand access to state ID cards and driver's licenses, regardless of a person's immigration status.
And the purpose of these bills is to restore Michigan's pre-2008 practice of allowing residents to obtain a Michigan driver's license and state ID card, regardless of their ability to demonstrate U.S. citizenship or immigration status. It's in our collective interest that all Michigan drivers are trained, screened, tested, made familiar with Michigan driving regulations, and also have access to purchase auto insurance.
The resolution was approved unanimously. After a brief introduction, Council unanimously approved allocations totaling $94,000 to support community events led by local organizations. Finally, Council considered a resolution directing changes to the City Code that will increase opportunities for home occupations or businesses in residential districts. This part of the City Code was most recently amended in 2021. The amendments of 2021 clarified standards for home occupations, allowing activities that are incidental and secondary to the residential use. Those amendments set maximum floor areas, maximum numbers of customer visits per day, and a maximum number of non-resident employees. This week's resolution directs the City Planning Commission to revisit this part of the City Code to allow uses that are not incidental or secondary, and also relax standards around permissible floor area, number of daily customer visits, and non-resident employees. Proposed changes would be prioritized ahead of the Comprehensive Land Use Plan. Earlier in the evening, a public commenter spoke to the issue.
I really am in favor of this, but we were expecting to wait for the comprehensive plan revision process to be done and then likely have this be something that we would be able to do. I'd like to go through that process and not jump that process, which this resolution seems to do. So we're skipping a step here, and I really want to see this happen, but I really want us to do it in the right way.
Council discussed it.
And the idea was, how can we encourage more innovation and entrepreneurs who are doing small home businesses but don't have the access to capital for commercial kitchens, commercial rent. We've got a lot of immigrant BIPOC folks who are making food at home and selling it, but without a real presence, with only one employee, which is themselves. So we have a couple amendments we'd like to work on. And so I'd like to move to postpone this vote until the September meeting so that we can work on those amendments.
By unanimous vote, the resolution was postponed. The meeting adjourned at 8:15 p.m. without any further public comment. For more details about this meeting, visit A2Council.com.
Welcome to this week's A2Council Moment of Zen.
So we have a couple amendments we'd like to work on. And so I'd like to move to postpone this vote until the September meeting so that we can work on those amendments.
Would it be better to provide some of those amendments now so that then there's opportunity to consider them over the course of in between periods of time, or do you want to just,
I'd rather just reintroduce it and then with the amendments.